The diner had a way of swallowing sound until it wanted you to hear it. Neon hummed against the rain-streaked windows, throwing red and blue across chrome napkin holders and glass sugar shakers. Ceiling fans pushed around air that smelled like burnt coffee, fried onions, and the kind of tired that settled into people's bones. Rain sat in the corner booth, back to the wall, hands wrapped around a chipped white mug. The coffee was bad. He drank it anyway. From where he sat, the whole place was framed neatly, the door, the counter, the grill line, and the thin young waitress moving between them like she'd been poured into the space. Maddie. She refilled a trucker's cup without looking at him, smile snapping on and off like a switch. Her sneakers squeaked on the tile where someone had mopped half-heartedly and given up. The late crowd was thin, one guy in a ball cap, a couple in uniform, still half in their shifts, a lone woman breaking apart a muffin crumb by crumb. Rain watched Maddie angle her tray around the corner of the counter. She was fast, efficient, the way you got when tips decided whether you paid rent. But there was something off in the way she held herself, in the way her shoulders instinctively rounded every time someone at the counter shifted too quick. She reached for a pot on the warmer, fresh coffee filling the air. As she stepped in beside a man at the counter, his hand shot out. His fingers closed around her wrist. The world took one sharp breath and held it. The pot slipped from her hand. For a heartbeat, it hung in fluorescent light glass, catching neon, a tiny galaxy of reflections. Then gravity remembered itself. The pot hit the tile and detonated glass, shattering coffee, exploding in a dark spray. The crack of impact tore through the diner like a gunshot. The woman with the muffin jumped. The couple in uniform froze mid-bite. A fork clattered to a plate and stayed there. Maddie didn't move. Trent had her wrist twisted just enough to hurt, not enough to leave a mark you could see from across the room. His knuckles were pale where they dug into her skin. "Watch what you're doing," he said. Low voice, lazy drawl, like he was giving advice instead of issuing a warning. Her face tried to find a smile, the muscles remembering the motion even if the rest of her didn't. "It's fine," she said. "I'm fine." She wasn't. It was there in the way her body folded, the way she turned half away from him while pretending she wasn't moving at all. She disappeared in place, shrinking without changing height. Nobody at the counter looked directly. The trucker stared harder at the menu he'd already ordered from. The cook flipped something on the grill that didn't need flipping. The ceiling fans kept turning. Life pretended it hadn't just seen the world bare its teeth. From the corner booth, Rain didn't look away. He saw the faint yellow bloom of an old bruise sliding out from under her sleeve when Trent's grip shifted. He saw the tremor in the fingers of her free hand as she steadied herself on the counter. He saw the way she swallowed, like the worst part wasn't the pain but the embarrassment of making a scene. Rain already kept a manila envelope in his saddlebag, thick with proof men like Trent never saw coming. Trent let go, like he'd grown bored of holding her. He wiped his hand on her apron, as if she were something sticky he'd spilled on himself. His eyes moved lazily across the room, checking for witnesses he could intimidate or ignore. They landed on Rain. For a second, the room narrowed to the line between them. Trent's smile returned a few degrees off polite. Not friendly. A warning. The kind of look that said times, "Don't." Asterisk. Rain met it without offering anything back. No challenge. No flinch. Just presence. The spell broke. Noise seeped back in slow. The sizzle of the grill. The scrape of a plate. Someone's awkward laugh. Maddie knelt to pick up shards of glass napkins, soaking up coffee at her knees. Her hands moved fast, but Rain saw the way her fingers shook. Her wrist was already red where Trent had gripped it. Time passed in the small ways it always did, orders called, plates delivered, receipts signed. Later, Maddie refilled cups again with a fresh pot. When she stretched to reach the far side of the counter, her sleeve rode up. The edge of a bruise showed yellow-green, ugly against pale skin. Old damage, not from tonight. Bull sat at the counter, shoulders blocking half the light. He watched the bruise appear, watched it vanish under cotton again. "Rough night?" he asked, voice almost careful. Maddie's smile came quick, a reflex. "I'm clumsy," she said. Rain spoke without lifting his eyes from his mug. You believe that he already knew Bull didn't. The silence was answer enough. When the diner finally started emptying out chairs, scraping bells, chiming at the door, Rain put some bills under his cup and walked out with Bull and Jesse. Outside, the air was cooler, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and distant diesel. The neon sign buzzed overhead, one letter flickering. In the lot, a black Charger idled under a dead light. Engine low, a steady growl. Its headlights were pointed straight at the diner windows, bright white eyes that didn't blink. Rain followed the line of those lights to the inside, where Maddie wiped the counter in long automatic strokes. Even from out here he saw the way her shoulders tightened. The Charger revved once, twice, holding the sound too long. Rain took in the details without thinking about it. Cracked right headlight, slight dent in the front bumper. A scrape along the passenger side. The way the driver leaned back like effort was something he'd outsourced long ago. The car finally pulled away, taillights smearing red across the wet pavement before disappearing into the dark. Bull blew out a breath. "You see her wrist?" he asked. Rain kept his eyes on the road where the Charger had gone. "I saw everything," he said. He stood there a second longer, listening to the engines in the distance, to the fading echo of breaking glass that everyone inside had already decided to forget. The night closed around the diner, pretending nothing had happened. Rain didn't pretend. The road he knew wasn't done with Trent. Dawn came in slow, the kind that didn't warm anything, just exposed what the night left behind. The sky over the highway stretched pale and empty as the crew rolled out. Rain in front, Bull to his right, Jesse behind, Mateo steady on the tail. Engines rumbled low, a sound that settled into the ribs like a second heartbeat. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The road cut through open fields, frost glittering on the brush. When the sun finally crested the horizon, the world lit up in hard gold. Rain kept his eyes forward, but his thoughts tracked the same direction, the black Charger's taillights disappearing, Maddie's wrist turning red under someone else's hand. They reached the gas station a little after 6, the kind of place that lived off travelers too tired to care what they bought. The air tasted like dust, warm oil, and cheap diesel. A stray dog slept under a bench, ribs visible even through its fur. The house they came for sat behind the pumps, slumped in the dirt like it had been dropped there. Boards curled off the siding. A satellite dish hung crooked, pointing nowhere. It wasn't on any map, but places like this didn't need to be. Men like Trent made their own landmarks. Rain cut his engine. The sudden quiet snapped tight around them. Bull stepped off his bike and ran a palm across the hood of the Charger parked beside the house. The metal was still warm. "He got here not long ago," Bull muttered. Jesse crouched near the front bumper, touching a streak of dried brown. "He likes to drive angry." Mateo circled the house, hands in pockets, gaze sharp. Curtains drawn. A shadow moved inside. "She's in there," he said. Rain didn't check for confirmation. He just walked. The door wasn't even latched. Inside, the smell hit first rotting leftovers, sweat-stale beer. The TV cast a cold blue glow over everything, making the living room look like a crime scene already marked for evidence. Maddie sat on a sunken couch, knees together, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. A fresh bruise darkened her cheek. Her eyes flicked up at Rain, then down again, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to look. Across from her, Trent stood, barefoot, beard dangling from his fingers, remote in the other hand. He turned when Rain stepped in. What the hell? Rain wasn't looking at him. He looked at Maddie. "Do you want to leave?" he asked, voice steady. She shook her head immediately, the lie rehearsed, reflexive. "No," she whispered. Rain stepped closer, slow enough she didn't flinch. "Maddie," he said, softer now. "Do you want to leave?" Her breath hitched. Tears welled. She nodded. Trent's laugh scraped across the room. "She ain't going anywhere." He swung sloppily, full of beer and ego. Rain didn't step back. He moved forward, catching Trent's fist midair. The twist was clean practiced. The beer bottle slipped from Trent's other hand, shattering at his feet. A knee drove into his gut. An elbow cracked into his jaw. His body folded like he'd been hit by something bigger than a man. Rain grabbed his shirt, whispered something Maddie couldn't hear, then let him fall. Jesse and Mateo were already moving, guiding Maddie out the door. She clutched the coat. Jesse draped over her shoulders, her breath shaking but steadying with every step away from that room. Bull lingered a moment longer. He sifted through a dish of keys on the counter, pulling out a driver's license between two fingers. "Got his," he said, slipping it into his pocket. "He'll be missing that." They didn't take her far, just far enough. The desert spread wide behind an abandoned diner, silent, except for wind scraping across sand. Maddie sat in the grass, knees pulled close. She wasn't crying. She was breathing like she had to relearn how. Rain crouched beside her and held out a cigarette. She took it even though she didn't smoke, held it like a lifeline. "You don't owe us anything," Rain said. Her voice was rough when she answered. "I want to learn. I don't ever want to be scared again." Rain nodded once. That was enough. The others drifted closer, Bull leaning against the truck, Jesse with her soft half-smile, Mateo offering a wrench like a quiet acceptance. Miles away, Trent woke alone in his house. Keys gone. Wallet gone. Car gone. A photograph winking up at him from the table, him asleep, Maddie's bruises in the frame. A note beside it read Times, "You don't own anything." Asterisk. By noon, a manila envelope slid through the sheriff's mail slot. Photos, records, no accusations, no threats. The system got its chance. Rain didn't wait on whether it would take it. Back at the shop, Maddie stood at the open bay door. The jacket Jesse handed her hung heavy in her arms. Black denim. Clean. No patch yet. "You ride with us," Jesse said. "Doesn't make you one of us, but it makes you safe." Maddie held the jacket like she was trying to decide if it was too much or not enough. She put it on anyway. Bull handed her his second helmet, red visor, cracked history embedded in it. "Don't test it," he said. Mateo knelt to show her how to check the oil. Jesse ran her through the basics of a carburetor, hands steady, patient. Rain stood back, watching her move between them with careful steps, like she was learning a new language. She was. Later, Bull nodded toward the road. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Rain didn't answer. Didn't need to. Quiet didn't mean safe. Quiet meant time to prepare. The shop woke early, long before the sun had the nerve to show its face. Cold air pooled on the concrete floor, carrying the scent of oil, steel, and something like possibility. Maddie stood in the middle of it all, hair tied up in a loose knot. Rain's oversized work gloves swallowing her hands as she fumbled with a stubborn lug nut. The wrench slipped with a sharp Times clank asterisk. "Stop fighting it," Jessie said from behind her. Maddie exhaled hard. "I'm not fighting it." "You are," Jessie replied, stepping in. "You're bracing like it's going to hit you back." She repositioned Maddie's stance, feet apart, shoulder down, angle clean. One smooth pull. The wrench snapped the nut free with a crisp, metallic crack. Maddie blinked, half surprised at her own strength. Jessie grinned, tapping the wrench against her palm. "Machines don't hit," she said. "That's why people like us trust them." She moved off to help Mateo with an engine hoist, leaving Maddie with her small, quiet victory. The jacket she'd been given hung from a peg on the wall, black denim, no patch edges, still stiff. It waited for her like an invitation she wasn't sure she deserved yet. Bull trudged in, carrying a red helmet under his arm, the one with the cracked visor. He set it on the bench next to her. "Your size," he said. Maddie touched the crack with her thumb. "What happened?" Bull snorted. "Guy thought he could pass a semi on a blind turn." I disagreed. "Beat." Helmet did too. Maddie didn't know if that was supposed to be reassurance, but it felt like one. Rain watched from the open bay door, leaning against the frame. He was doing that thing he always did, cataloging everything without comment. Every tool out of place, every sound too sharp, every shadow moving wrong. The man could read danger in the way dust settled. When Maddie caught him watching, he didn't look away. He just nodded once. A silent "Times, keep going," times that hit deeper than anything loud could have. By late morning, the diner was busier than usual. Locals drifted through in a slow stream, gossip pooling around the counter. Rain slid into a booth across from Bull, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted as tired as the waitress serving it. A gas station clerk stood at the counter, shifting from foot to foot like he wasn't sure he should be talking. "Saw Trent last night," he said quietly. "Came in real late. Looked wrong." Rain set his mug down. "Define wrong." The clerk swallowed, muttering. "Said something about traitors, making things right. Bought duct tape, zip ties, a knife." Jessie stopped mid-sip from her milkshake. Bull's hand curled into a fist on the table. "He say anything else?" Rain asked. "He didn't say it to me," the clerk whispered. "He said it to himself." Rain's jaw worked once slow. Back at the shop, Maddie was tightening a drive belt when Rain returned. He didn't tell her what the clerk had said, not yet. But she read the shift in him anyway. Rain didn't need to speak for the air around him to change. Later, when the sun dipped, Maddie wandered into the bay where Bull was polishing chrome like it had personally offended him. She hesitated. "You ever stop feeling scared?" she asked. Bull paused mid-swipe. The overhead bulbs hummed above them. "You don't stop feeling it," he said. "You just stop letting it drive." Mateo leaned against the tool chest, adding without looking up. "Fear's a tool, same as a wrench. Wrong hands, dangerous. Right hands, it keeps you alive." Jessie popped her head around the corner, grease smeared across her cheek. "And if you're lucky," she said, "you get to choose what scares you." Maddie wasn't sure she believed them yet. But she wanted to. That night, Rain stayed long after everyone else drifted off. The manila envelope lay open on his desk, the one he'd sent to the sheriff, the one he shouldn't still need. The sheriff hadn't called, hadn't even pretended to. Rain closed the folder slowly, fingers pressing into the cardboard until it bowed. Outside, the shop lights hummed against the dark. Maddie stood near the gate, the red helmet under one arm, the black jacket clutched in the other. Her silhouette looked steadier than it had days ago, but the shadows still clung to her ankles. Rain stepped up beside her. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "A little." Lying, she didn't deny it. Rain studied the quiet road stretching out before them. Somewhere beyond that darkness, Trent had started circling again. Messy, angry, hungry for control he'd already lost. Maddie didn't look away from the road. "If he comes," she said quietly, "I won't run." Rain's voice came back low, certain. "No, you won't." He didn't say it to comfort her. He said it because he had already seen it, the way she picked up tools, the way she stood her ground, the way she kept showing up. The night pressed in around them. A cold wind rattled the loose sheet metal on the side of the shop. Quiet wasn't safety. Quiet was the moment before something arrived. The fire started small, quiet enough that the night almost kept it secret. Behind the diner, the alley sat in shadow trash bins lined up like tired soldiers. A lone street lamp flickered overhead, buzzing in the cold. Somewhere in the dark, a lighter clicked once, twice, then caught flame. A glass bottle arced through the air. It hit the inside of a bin with a hollow thump, then bloomed. Fire roared upward, hungry and sudden, licking the back wall in long orange tongues. Plastic curled and shriveled. Cardboard caught instantly. The heat was sharp, vicious, smelling of accelerant. By the time anyone saw it, the flames had eaten through half the alley. Rain arrived before the truck. Smoke curled around him as he crouched beside the scorched wall, fingers brushing a melted patch of asphalt. A faint tire print warped in the heat, same tread pattern, same offset weight distribution. Jessie came up behind him, cloth over her mouth. "That's someone sending a message," she said. Rain straightened slowly. His eyes tracked the black streaks running up the wall, the deliberate burn pattern. "Yeah," he murmured. "And he wants us to read it loud." The fire crew doused it quickly, but the damage remained charred, siding warped metal smoke, clinging to the bricks like a bruise. 2 nights later, another hit landed. Mateo's place. Rain arrived to a driveway filled with broken glass and curling smoke trails. The garage door hung half torn off its track. Tools were scattered across the concrete, as though someone had stomped through the place, swinging blind. Mateo stood in the yard, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. A dog bowl lay overturned near the step, the collar that once hung above it gone. Bull scanned the mess with slow, deliberate rage. "This ain't some drunk idiot," he said. "This is personal." Rain didn't answer. He was staring at the front door, specifically the sticker slapped dead center. A sheriff's badge emblem peeled down the middle like someone had ripped it in two. Jessie blew out a breath. He's not working alone. They spent the next hours tracking whispers, dark parking lots, back rooms, cash sliding across metal counters. Mateo's contacts didn't talk, but they didn't need to. The silence pointed clearer than words. A name took shape like a bruise, rising beneath skin. Deputy Concade. New badge. Loose leash. Big mouth. Questions asked in places no badge should be. Someone who knew how to strike from behind authority without carrying the weight of it. The final confirmation came from the rail yard. Maddie followed silently, hood-up footsteps, light on gravel. She kept to the shadows between 2 rusting train cars, breath, low eyes focused. Concade stood alone near a freight container uniform shirt, unbuttoned just enough to show he didn't care. He hurled empty bottles at the steel siding. Each shatter echoed. He laughed too loud for someone with no audience. Then he pulled out a lighter, the same model Rain found melted behind the diner fire. Flame flared under his thumb. He stared at it like it spoke to him. Maddie lifted her phone. One photo. Clean. Time-stamped. Badge visible. Fire starter in hand. Her pulse thudded, but her hands didn't shake. She slid back into the dark and vanished. By morning, the shop gathered in the bay, the photo displayed on Rain's cracked tablet. Jesse whistled low. "That's the sheriff's blood." "And his problem," Bull added. Rain said nothing. He picked up the tablet, tucked it under his arm, and drove straight to the station. The sheriff sat behind his desk, shoulders slumped under the weight of paperwork and years. When Rain set the tablet down, the older man stared at the image long and hard. Concade. Night. Lighter. Badge gleaming under the railyard lamps. "That's my nephew," the sheriff said, finally. Rain didn't blink. Blood doesn't erase fire. The sheriff leaned back, face tightening, as truth and duty scraped against loyalty. When he spoke again, his voice had aged a decade. "Leave it with me," he said. "I'll handle it." Rain didn't nod, didn't thank him. He simply turned and walked out the office door, closing with a quiet click times behind him. 2 days later, Concade was simply gone. Transferred. Administrative leave. No statement. No press. No repairs to Maddie's burned wall. But the railyard went quiet. That evening, Maddie stood in the back lot of the shop jacket, zipped hands tucked into the pockets. The wind tugged her hair across her cheek. Night settled around her, soft but alert. Crystal stepped out beside her, cup of tea steaming in her hands. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Maddie's eyes stayed on the horizon. "He's trying to scare us," she said. Rain stepped out of the bay, wiping grease from his palms. "No," he said. "He's trying to make us swing wild." Maddie turned toward him. "Are we going to?" Rain shook his head once. "We swing clean." The night air cooled further, carrying the scent of smoke from the diner's damaged wall. Somewhere out there, Trent was still moving, angry, circling, looking for a way back into control he'd already lost. But Maddie didn't pull her jacket tighter. She stood her ground. The quiet around them wasn't peace. It was pressure. Something was coming next. The sheriff showed up early the next morning, too early for a man who never hurried. His truck rolled to a stop in the lot, engine idling in the cold. Rain stepped outside before the man even reached the door. The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through hair that had gone gray around the edges. "You get a letter?" he asked. Rain didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sheriff read the silence for what it was. "I can't stop what's coming," the older man said quietly, "but I can stand close." Rain looked past him to the road where frost glittered in a thin strip of Sunday. "If we need help," he said, "it'll already be too late." The sheriff nodded, jaw tight. "Then I'll stay anyway." He left without another word. Security tightened after that. The shop turned into a fortress, one bolt at a time. Windows reinforced entry points. Doubled locks checked twice. Bull installed heavier bars across the back door. Mateo rerouted the exterior cameras so every angle overlapped. Inside the office, Maddie and Crystal set up sleeping bags and blankets. Ezra claimed the battered couch, headphones on without music, eyes darting every time someone walked past. Jesse trained everyone in the narrow hall beside the parts shelf. Short commands, tight movements, controlled breathing. She didn't talk about fear, but she didn't have to. They all felt it pressing in from the perimeter. 3 nights in Rain pulled Maddie aside. "This might not be about you," he said. She raised a brow. "But it probably is." He hesitated. The quiet between them stretched thin. Maddie reached into her pocket and held out something small, a flash drive. Rain didn't take it at first. What's on it? Everything, she said. Trent, the fire, Kincaid, the evidence we still have. Why give it to me now? Maddie's gaze didn't break. Because if I don't make it out of whatever's coming, someone should know why. Rain's throat tightened, but he didn't show it. He closed his hand around the drive. I'll carry it. The letter's promised day crawled closer. The night before the shop held its breath. Tools sat untouched. Coffee went cold. Nobody dared leave the lot. Maddie slept lightly in the office, Crystal beside her, the glow of a flashlight flickering beneath Crystal's chin like a protective talisman. Rain stood watch outside, boots crunching over thin snow breath visible in the dark. At 2:17 a.m., the first bottle hit. It missed the wall by inches, exploding into flame across the gravel. Mateo was already moving extinguisher, hissing as foam swallowed fire. Bull sprinted toward the side gate. "Movement!" he shouted. Two silhouettes rushed the fence with bolt cutters. Jesse dropped one with a clean tackle. Bull slammed the other into the dirt. Zip ties bit wrists before they could speak. Rain checked the cameras. His jaw set. "This isn't it," he said. "This is the noise before the real fight." And then the real fight arrived. 3 trucks crept up the dirt road, no plates, lights dead. They rolled in like the dark itself had grown wheels. When they stopped, 6 men stepped out. Masks, rifles, heavy breath steaming in the cold. Rain walked into the lot coat, unzipped hands empty. The leader stepped forward. Scarred jaw, calm eyes. "You must be Rain." Rain didn't blink. "You're trespassing. You took something," the man said. Rain's voice came back flat. "We kept what you tried to break." The man smiled like he admired the answer. Then he raised a hand. Gunfire tore open the night. Windows exploded inward. Sparks flew from metal siding. The shop glowed red under the emergency lights. Mateo flipped on shadows, dancing like ghosts along the walls. Bull charged one attacker, dropping him with brute force. Mateo moved like smoke, silent, fast, precise. Jesse fired from behind the welding station, each shot a clean punch of sound. Maddie saw one of the masked men sprint toward the office door. Crystal and Ezra were inside. She didn't call out. She didn't hesitate. She ran. She caught him halfway up the stairs, crowbar in both hands. The first swing shattered his shoulder. The knife fell. The second cracked his ribs. He dropped. She stood over him, breath-shaking crowbar dripping with cold air. Rain fought the leader in the lot, fists, boots, gravel grinding underfoot. The man swung a broken pipe, wild and low. Rain caught his wrist, twisted. Bone snapped with a clean, sick sound. "Wrong house," Rain said, breath fogging between them. Sirens finally cut through the chaos. Not one, many. The sheriff's trucks barreled in lights, slicing open the dark. Deputies rushed out, weapons drawn, scanning the scene. But the fight was already over. Masked bodies on the ground. Rifles kicked aside. 2 intruders zip-tied near the gate. No one dead. Not tonight. Crystal burst out of the office with Ezra behind her. Maddie followed, limp, slight, from adrenaline burning out. The sheriff stepped forward. Rain tossed a bloodied mask at his feet. "They came for children," Rain said. The sheriff didn't argue, didn't pretend it was anything else. "I'll clean up," he said. Rain looked past him to the shattered windows and the kids standing under the flickering red lights. We already did. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and sweat and relief that didn't feel like victory. Jessie sat Maddie down and checked her hands. Crystal wrapped a blanket around Ezra. Mateo leaned against the wall, lighting a cigarette with shaking fingers. Bull just sat on a crate, breathing through rage he wasn't letting out yet. Rain stood in the middle of it all, the flash drive Maddie had given him heavy in his pocket. Tonight wasn't the end. It was the proof they would need for whatever came next. Morning didn't come gently. It scraped across the horizon like someone dragging metal over concrete. The shop felt heavier after the attack, like the walls themselves remembered every echo of gunfire. The shattered windows were boarded, now casting long stripes of shadow across the floor. Coffee percolated in the corner, bitter and overboiled, but no one complained. They needed the heat more than the taste. Rain sat at the table with Bull, Mateo, and Jessie. Crystal perched on a stool nearby, legs pulled up, sleeves hiding her hands. Maddie stood by the sink, rinsing dried blood from her knuckles in silence. The knock came soft, too soft. Everyone froze. Rain moved first. When he opened the door, a federal badge stared back at him, polished official, and held by a man who looked like he ironed his personality the same way he ironed his suit. "Agent Carrion," the man said, stepping inside without waiting. "FBI." Jessie muttered under her breath. "Perfect." Carrion walked the shop floor like he was inspecting a crime scene already solved in his head. His eyes raked over boarded windows, spent casings still swept into piles, the scorch marks on the concrete. "You had quite a night," he said. Rain didn't respond. Carrion turned, fixing him with a smile that had too much calculation and not enough warmth. "We're investigating an incident involving multiple assailants, illegal discharge of firearms," and his eyes flicked to Maddie, "reckless endangerment of minors." Crystal flinched. Ezra stiffened. Rain stepped between them and Carrion without fanfare. "We defended our own." "That's the problem," Carrion replied. "Your own includes witnesses, vulnerable ones." He placed a folder on the table. Thick, weighted. "Security footage," he said, tapping the cover. "Phone, logs, communication records." Jessie leaned her hip against the counter, arms folded. "You want a raccoon stealing a hot dog," she said. "That's the only footage we've got." Carrion didn't blink. "You're hiding something." Rain's jaw tightened. "We're protecting someone." Carrion let out a slow breath as though trying to appear patient. He opened the folder. Inside were photos, Crystal at 12 bruises down her rib cage. ER reports. Signatures of officers who took statements and failed to act. Restraining orders filed, stamped, ignored. Crystal's breath hitched when she saw them. Maddie stepped closer to her without hesitation. Carrion closed the folder with a tidy Times thump asterisk. "Victims have rights too," he said. Then he walked out. The shop was silent after the door shut. Jessie whispered, "He's not here for them. He's here to control the narrative." Rain rubbed a hand across his face. "He's pressure." Bull nodded. "Feels like a leash." That night, Rain called a meeting. No motorcycles rumbling, no tools clattering, just 6 people and one truth. The folder sat on the table. No one wanted to touch it. Rain finally opened it, sliding the photos into a neat line. Maddie's eyes hardened with each page. Mateo's jaw worked. Bull's fists stayed closed. "This doesn't go away," Rain said. Maddie lifted one of the photos, a hospital intake sheet with Crystal's name misspelled, dated 3 years ago. "They forgot her then," she said. "They won't forget her now." Crystal sat straighter, though her voice trembled. "I don't want him finding me." Or using me. Rain nodded. Then we erased the trail. Mateo cracked his knuckles. Digital first. Security feeds. Cloud backups. Anything that puts her name near this place. Jesse added. Then paper. Logs. Receipts. Anything with a timestamp that puts her in our orbit. They moved at once. Mateo wiped the security system clean, overwriting footage, with blank black screens and a single harmless clip of a raccoon rummaging in the trash. He checked network logs, scrubbed IP traces, rerouted stray signals. Bull hauled old boxes of paperwork into the yard. He fed pages into a burn barrel flame, chewing through forms, receipts, stray incident notes. Jesse redacted what needed to stay, black markers stripping names into silence. Inside the diner, Maddie met the sheriff in her usual booth. She placed copies of the photos on the table between them. "You going to help him?" she asked quietly. The sheriff stared at the images, at Crystal's face, at the bruises, at the dates. His shoulders sank. "I'll make sure she stays invisible." Maddie shook her head, voice firm. "Not invisible. Safe." The sheriff swallowed the correction and nodded once. She slid the folder back into her bag and walked out. Back at the shop, Crystal stepped into the cold back lot. She watched snow float in slow spirals, settling on the bikes lined under the awning. Rain joined her hands in his coat pockets. "You holding up?" he asked. Crystal shrugged. "I don't know what okay feels like." Rain nodded slowly. "You will." She looked up at him. "Promise." "Yeah," Rain said. "Promise." Inside, Jesse murmured to Maddie near the workbench. "Think we're done?" Maddie shook her head. "We're never done. Just quiet for now." Rain watched Crystal breathe in the cold night air, watched Ezra sketch beside the heater, watched Maddie clean her tools with a steady hand. The shop felt different, not broken, just braced. Spring didn't slip in gently. It arrived like it wasn't sure the town deserved a second chance. The frost thinned. The air warmed just enough to trick the flowers into blooming through gravel cracks. The diner buzzed earlier in the mornings, crowds returning with the thaw. But the shop stayed half-shadowed, as if the walls still remembered the gunfire too vividly to relax. Maddie worked through it. Every day, she was at the bay door before Rain unlocked it. Jacket sleeves rolled, wrench already in hand. The engine noise no longer made her flinch. She moved toward it, not away. She learned how machines shifted with the seasons, how cold valves tightened, how spring air changed the way an engine breathed. Crystal welded in the corner, sparks lighting her face in brief flashes. Each burst reflected a little more confidence. Ezra hovered near both of them, notebook in hand, sketching machines with more detail than a boy. His age should know bolts, angles, the way Maddie bent over a carburetor like she was listening for secrets. Bull rebuilt the front gate by hand, steel plates hammered into place like punctuation. Mateo rewired the perimeter cameras until they looped in clean arcs. Jesse reorganized the armory for the third time because chaos shouldn't get a head start. Life didn't return to normal. It returned to time's functional asterisk. Sometimes that mattered more. The phone call came on a morning that felt too bright to hold bad news. The shop's old landline, yellowed, cracked, practically antique, rang from the office wall. Nobody touched it at first. It never rang unless something was wrong. Rain moved toward it, wiping grease from his hands. He lifted the receiver. "Yeah." Static rushed through the line, then a breath, uneven, frightened. A woman's voice broke through, low and ragged. "I was wrong." Rain's brow tightened. "Who is this?" Another breath. Quieter this time. I didn't think he'd. I was wrong. Then the click. Silence. Rain stayed there long after the dial tone hummed. Maddie found him still holding the receiver thumb pressed white against the plastic. "Who was it?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice seemed to fall into the room rather than rise. "Trent's mother." Maddie stopped. A long moment stretched between them. "She's alive." Rain nodded once. "Running." Maddie swallowed. From what Rain looked out, the bay doors toward the highway, toward the direction the voice sounded like it came from. From him. A letter arrived the next day. No return address. Postmarked El Paso, paper thin enough to feel fingerprints through. Rain opened it at the workbench while the others gathered around. A single photograph slid out. Trent. Different haircut. New scar along the jaw. Same dead weight in the eyes. He was standing with a group of men in tactical gear, armored SUVs behind them. A logo was stenciled across the nearest vehicle, sharp lines, bold text, Vanguard Corp. Jesse exhaled sharply. "I've heard of them, none of it good." Bull's shoulders stiffened. So the coward got himself a uniform. Maddie studied the picture without blinking. A smear of grease crossed the bottom edge from her thumb, but she didn't wipe it away. "This isn't over," she said quietly. Rain didn't argue. That night the shop gathered around the planning table. No drinks, no music, just purpose. Maps spread across the surface, overlapping like a spiderweb. Highways, desert paths, border routes. Mateo pointed out intersections. Jesse noted choke points. Bull loaded weapon cases with methodical hands. Crystal stood beside Maddie, watching every line Rain drew. Finally, Crystal stepped forward. "I'm coming." Maddie turned fast. "No, not this time. You know how to disappear now. Use it." Crystal shook her head. "This isn't about hiding. Not anymore." She didn't look at Maddie when she said it. She looked at Rain. He studied her posture, not the fear in her hands, but the steadiness in her spine. "She rides," he said. Maddie didn't argue again. She placed a hand on Crystal's shoulder, instead fingers firm, voice low. "Then you stay close." Before dawn, the gate rolled open. Engines whispered awake in the cold. Frost cracked under tires. The horizon glowed faint orange. Rain rode first. Maddie followed, visor down. Crystal came between them, jacket zipped to her throat. Behind them, Jesse and Mateo formed the middle line. Bull closed the rear, a moving wall of muscle and steel. Ezra stood by the shop door, notebook hugged to his chest. As they passed, Jesse handed him a ring of keys. "For next time," she said. He nodded like she'd handed him a future. The bikes rolled out as the sun broke over the ridge. The town slept, but the road didn't. The border greeted them with cold that cut through denim and leather. Nights in the desert didn't warm easily, not even in spring. They stopped at a lonely gas station outside Marfa, where the neon open sign flickered like it couldn't decide if hope was worth the electricity. Rain leaned against his bike, watching the sky stretch wide and empty. Maddie traced their route on the map again, finger steady. Crystal sipped bitter coffee, both hands wrapped around the cup like it was the only warmth she trusted. No one talked about what would happen if they found him. They just kept moving. Juarez was a different world air, thinner danger, louder. Buildings wore bullet scars like permanent tattoos. Street vendors served tacos under military checkpoints. Neon lights buzzed, mixing with the smell of gasoline and sweat. Jessie led them through side alleys to a woman she knew, though knew was generous. The woman was in her 60s, skin weathered like sun-cracked leather, silver hair braided tight. She wore a necklace made of spent shell casings. "You're looking for men who don't hide," she said. Her voice rasped like sand scraping metal. "They recruit." She slid a photo across the table. Trent, leaner, harder, wearing a tactical vest and a dead grin. Behind him stood a man with a shaved head and a crucifix tattooed on his throat. "El Cura," she said, "ex-cartel. Now he trains contracts for your vanguard." Crystal exhaled. Maddie's jaw tightened. The woman tapped her necklace once. "They don't leave this city clean. If he's here, he's doing something dirty." The next few days blurred. They followed whispers, paid in cash, walked through burned-out warehouses and half-abandoned compounds where old fights still clung to concrete. Rain kept them moving, never spending more than an hour in one place. Everywhere they went, the same truth appeared. Vanguard wasn't a company anymore. It was a mask. A mask for men like El Cura. For men like Trent, given a new name, a new job, and a place to carry his old violence like a credential. One night Crystal asked quietly, "Do you think he even remembers me?" Maddie looked at her, eyes steady. "He'll remember when he sees us." The break came from a hacker kid Jessie paid in folded pesos and a pack of cigarettes. He handed them a grainy drone shot taken above a caravan of armored SUVs heading north. The second vehicle showed a familiar face, leaning out the window, laughing at something just out of frame. "Trent." Rain drew a circle on the map. "Abandoned mine," he said. "This pass is the only way north before the checkpoints." Bull cracked his wrists. "So we meet him where the road narrows." No one argued. The mine sat in a dead stretch of land, rock dust, and wind carving long scars across the earth. The sun dipped low as they approached, turning the desert copper and blood red. They parked behind a bluff, crouched behind their bikes, and watched. 3 SUVs, 6 armed men, and Trent no longer hiding behind masks or shadows. He stood outside the lead vehicle, boots planted, smile sharp enough to cut. Maddie stepped forward before Rain spoke. "Let me." He didn't ask why. He knew. "You end this," he said. She walked into the open, boots crunching gravel, wind kicking dust across her shadow. The men turned, rifles lifted. Trent laughed. "Really?" he said. "They sent you." She stopped 10 feet away. "No," she said, "just me." He took a step. "You've got guts. Shame he didn't finish." The gunshot cracked through the canyon, echoing off rock. Trent's body dropped before his words did. Silence swallowed the mine. The remaining men froze. Jessie and Bull stepped out behind Maddie. Mateo flanked. Rain stood at her shoulder, calm and unshaken. One of the men raised his hand slowly. "She was his justice," he said. "We won't fight." They backed away, disappeared into the desert without another word. Rain placed a steady hand on Maddie's shoulder. She didn't tremble, didn't speak. She stared at Trent's still body like it was a chapter she'd waited too long to close. Night came fast, swallowing the horizon. Maddie sat on a rock ledge overlooking the mine, cigarette glowing faintly between her fingers. The smoke curled upward, vanishing into the cold. Crystal sat beside her. "You okay?" she asked. Maddie let the smoke drift out slow. "No," she said softly. "But you will be." Crystal didn't answer. She didn't need to. The stars were sharp tonight, clear, cold, patient. For the first time in months, the silence between them didn't feel like fear. It felt earned. The ride back across the desert was quiet, not peaceful, just drained. The kind of quiet that follows a storm strong enough to rearrange a life. By the time the crew crossed the state line, dust coated their jackets, and the engines sounded tired like beasts that had outrun something heavy and old. The shop lights glowed on the horizon, a soft, stubborn beacon, but rest didn't come with the light. Two unmarked sedans were already parked at the gate. Inside the shop, the air smelled of steel-burnt coffee and a tension that hadn't settled. Rain parked first and stepped off his bike without removing his helmet. Agent Carrion stood in the middle of the bay, arms folded, suit immaculate, eyes sharp in that practiced way men used when they thought they could read a room. "You're back early," Carrion said. "Suspiciously early," Jesse muttered. "That's rich." Carrion opened a manila folder and slid it across the workbench. Photographs spilled out blurry shots of a body in a desert mine, dust tracks from SUVs, drone captures that shouldn't have existed. Maddie froze at the sight of Trent lying in red sand. Carrion clicked his pen once. "You want to explain how a known domestic abuser ends up dead south of the border while you all take a road trip?" Rain stayed silent. Carrion's jaw tightened. "You think you're hard to nail. Vigilantes are always the easiest. They believe justice excuses mess." "No," Rain said quietly, "but truth does." Carrion scoffed. "Spare me." He tapped another sheet, a time-stamped satellite clip. Rain recognized the ridge, the trucks, the mine. "This," Carrion said, "is enough to bury you all." Bull took one step forward. Jessie's hand brushed her holster. Mateo's eyes narrowed, calculating angles. Maddie didn't move. She stared at the photographs like they were ghosts she'd already buried once. Carrion lifted his chin, but his eyes flicked toward Crystal. "There's something more important here." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a second folder. Thicker, older. He set it down between them like a challenge. "Crystal's father filed a missing persons report," Carrion said, "along with a petition for custody reinstatement. Claims she's being held against her will by a motorcycle gang." Crystal's breath caught sharp. "He wants her back," Maddie demanded. Carrion didn't blink. "Wants control. There's a difference." Rain's voice cut through the tension. "What do you want?" Carrion studied him. "Then Crystal. Then the photos. Finally, to keep him from getting her." The shop went still. For the first time, Carrion's tone wasn't sharpened like a blade. It carried something heavier, something worn. "Your little war in the desert," he said. "That's noise. But men like her father, they use the system to clean their tracks. They don't need guns." Maddie stepped closer, voice low but steady. "What happens now?" Carrion closed the folders. "All digital evidence of her father's claim disappears tonight," he said. "The custody petition dies in a drawer. And the satellite footage," he met Rain's gaze, "never existed." Crystal's knees softened in relief, but she didn't let it show. "Why help us?" Rain asked. Carrion exhaled through his nose. "Because victims who survive shouldn't go back to the people who broke them. And because—" He hesitated just long enough to betray a crack in the armor. "I had a sister." Once, no one spoke. Carrion straightened, folding his professionalism back into place. "But understand this, what you did out there can't happen again. No cross-border hits. No freelance justice. I bury this, because letting him find her would be worse than letting you walk. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Rain, he glanced back. Your people protect the kids. I protect the paperwork. It's not heroism, just division of labor. He stepped out. The sedans rolled away, tires hissing against gravel. His taillights vanished into the dark. Inside the shop, no one moved for a long breath. Crystal finally sank onto the nearest stool, hands trembling against her jeans. Maddie knelt beside her, placing a gentle palm on her back. You're safe, she said. Crystal nodded, though her eyes stayed glassy. Jessie cracked open a bottle of whiskey and passed it around, not for celebration, just for breath. Bull leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So the Fed's on our side now. Mateo shrugged. Temporary truce doesn't mean trust. Rain looked at the closed folders on the table. The evidence, the erasure, the narrow escape hidden under bureaucratic dust. This wasn't victory, he said. Just consequence. Maddie stood meeting his gaze. But it was enough, she answered. Rain let out a slow breath, the kind that burns on the way out. Tonight they'd survived the system, the road, and the ghosts that didn't know when to stay buried. Tomorrow would bring something else. But tonight was theirs. Winter thawed into a soft, reluctant spring. Not loud, not triumphant. Just a slow easing, like the town finally exhaled after holding its breath too long. The shop breathed with it. The busted windows had been replaced, the scorch marks scrubbed down to faint shadows. New steel ribs supported the front gate. The place still carried scars, but they felt settled, now woven into the bones, instead of clawing at the surface. Inside life found its rhythm again. Crystal practiced welding every morning, sparks tracing bright arcs across her visor. Maddie guided her hands, not hovering, just steadying. Ezra swept the floors with earbuds and occasionally stopping to sketch a part or angle he didn't want to forget. Bull rebuilt an old bench near the bay door. Mateo rewired the office lights so they stopped flickering at dusk. Jessie took the night watch without complaint, her boots always near the door. Rain watched it all the way a man watches weather, quietly, reading what didn't need to be said. The roar of danger had faded, but the echo remained a reminder. One evening, Maddie and Crystal sat on the roof legs, dangling over the edge. The sunset bled orange and gold across the horizon. Below them, the shop hummed with the low chatter of wrenches and the occasional laugh. Crystal held a welding glove in her hands, twisting the fabric. You really think I belong here? She asked. Maddie didn't look away from the sky. You already do. Crystal exhaled lightly, as if she'd been bracing for a different answer. Down in the lot, Ezra practiced balancing a tire iron on one finger. Bull pretended not to watch, but corrected his grip when it started to fall. Jessie leaned against the fence, smoking, blowing shapes into the cooling dusk. Mateo walked out from the office holding something small, a folded paper envelope. He passed it to Rain quietly. Rain looked at it. No address, no handwriting. Just a seal. Where'd this come from? He asked. Left at the gate, Mateo said. Kid on a bike dropped it. Rain opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. Clean. Official. Deputy Concade terminated. Sheriff's internal review sealed. Case files closed. Rain folded the paper, once thumb brushing the edge. His breath left in a low hum. Justice didn't come fast, didn't come loud, but sometimes if pushed hard enough it came quietly. Later that night the whole crew gathered in the shop. No reason, no crisis, just instinct. Jessie tossed Rain a rag to wipe his hands. Bull placed a crate in the center of the room, serving as a makeshift table. Mateo cracked open a new bottle. Ezra handed out mismatched cups. Rain stood there for a moment, watching them, the patched-together family that the road had carved, scarred, and remade. He lifted his cup. "To the ones who stay standing," he said. Maddie clinked hers against his. "And the ones who help them up." Crystal raised hers, last eyes, steady voice clear. "To not going back." Silence settled over them, not heavy, not haunted, just full. They drank. The shop hummed with quiet life. Engines cooling, lights buzzing softly. The air smelling of metal smoke and something like peace. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. Later, Rain stepped outside alone. The night air cooled his jaw. The stars pressed low and bright above the lot. Maddie joined him, standing shoulder to shoulder. "It's strange," she said softly. "Feels like the world finally caught up." Rain nodded. "Or stopped chasing." A long quiet stretched between them, comfortable as worn leather. "What now?" she asked. Rain let his breath drift into the night. "Now," he said, "we build." Behind them, the shop lights glowed warm, steady, unbroken. The road didn't promise peace, but it offered time, enough to choose who they became next, enough to make something that lasted longer than fear. As Rain closed the gate for the night, the final line echoed in his mind like a truth earned the hard way, justice signs in cold ink. In the end, this story reminds us of something many adults, especially older Americans, already know. In their bones, the hardest battles are often fought in silence, and the bravest acts rarely make headlines. Maddie's journey shows that breaking free from harm isn't a single moment of courage, but a long road of choosing yourself again and again. It speaks to the quiet truth that healing doesn't come from pretending nothing happened. It comes from refusing to let the past own you. And sometimes, like the old saying goes, time's real gold doesn't fear the fire. Asterisk pressure doesn't destroy character. It reveals it. The story also highlights how community chosen, not inherited, can become a lifeline. We don't always get to pick the families we come from, but we can choose the people who stand beside us when the world feels heavy. And when we help someone else rise, we often find our own strength more clearly. As you sow, so shall you reap applies not only to harm, but also to kindness, dignity, and the quiet work of protecting one another. Finally, it's a reminder that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it arrives late and imperfect, but it still matters. Because self-respect, truth, and the courage to speak up are things no one should have to surrender, not at any age. If this story spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share a lesson you took from it, or a moment that resonated. Drop a comment, hit like to support the channel, and subscribe if you'd like more gripping and thoughtful stories like this. Wishing you peace tonight, deep, steady, and well-earned.